All right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, it's an epic one. We have Kenny Werner, a pianist, a composer, author, lecturer, and director of the Effortless Mastery Institute out of Berkeley. Kenny has been a world-class pianist composer for over 40 years. He has a prolific catalog of compositions, recordings, and publications, one of which started a whole department in Berkeley and is how I became aware of Kenny Werner. In 1996, he wrote the book Effortless Mastery, Liberating the Master Musician Within. And for me, it was the class that we never had in music school, right? You learn all these academic ways of how to play, what to play, but never how to feel and how to get in that space of playing. And after you graduate and you've gone through all this training and you've learned all these things, and you become aware of so many things and you've grown, but also you feel like you haven't grown. And for me, one of the things I wanted to be able to do was just feel free, be able to use all these things I've learned and have them just come out of me. And that puts you at a weird situation where how do you learn to feel and think? You've been trained to think on how to approach all these things. How do you just feel them now? A guide for balance, right? And that's where Kenny's book, Effortless Mastery, came in. I was reading Victor Wooten's book, The Music Lesson, and it was kind of like, once I got done with that, I'm like, I craved more of that type of insight. In Kenny's book, there's a 4-step mindfulness approach to training your brain to appreciate the master musician within and also use that technical aspect. Now, I'm going to let Kenny explain more of how that works in the conversation. This interview was a big one for me. I can point to a couple written books that really profoundly impacted my philosophical approach to life and music, one of which being Effortless Mastery, The Music Lesson by Victor Wooten, and Writings on Bruce Lee. And this is a really big honor to be able to pick the mind of someone whose philosophical and spiritual approach has affected my life. And I'm really excited to share this conversation with you guys. But before we get into it, I got to tell you about Kenny's new book. It's called Becoming the Instrument, Lessons on Self-Mastery from Music to Life. And it's a paired sequel, or it can be a prequel to Effortless Mastery. There's no real right way to read it. And it kind of like takes the ideas of Effortless Mastery, applies them to the bigger concept of life. It's a fantastic, inspiring read, and I highly recommend you check out Becoming the Instrument. It reinvigorated my mindful approach to practicing, and I believe it can do the same for you. Before we get into it, I also want to share that I talked with Vivian Arts. She is the only other teacher of Effortless Mastery, and if you want to dive more into Effortless Mastery, check out the conversation me and Vivian had. Also, before jumping into this conversation with Kenny, and if you're new to the podcast, I play in a band called C Level, letters C-Level. We are a high-energy funk punk reggae rock group based out of Cleveland, Ohio. We take 12-string acoustic instruments and run them through Marshall amplifiers. And we got a couple of dates to plug, one of which is July 14th at the West Side Bowl. We are opening for the band The Bumping Uglies with Joint Operation. And then August 17th, we are playing at the Rock Hall with Mellow Man Funk. So if you're in the Ohio area, we would be honored if you would join us on one of those dates. Anywho, now this conversation was like a lecture in one of the best ways. Like, I'm sitting there taking a lot in, and I think you guys will be as well. Before we get to the conversation, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to amazing guests like Kenny and sharing insight like that with you. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Kenny Werner. The first question I wanted to ask you was the influence of illusions.
Oh, well, that's a nice question. You know the book.
Yeah.
And it was the guy that wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull. What's his name? You must know if you know the book. Richard Bach? No. Well, anyway, doesn't matter anyway. The influence on me of illusions.
Yes.
I read it at a time where everything, the bottom had dropped out. I was in Europe, without being too specific without making it too long a story. Something I went there I thought was going to set the tone for a significant point in my life was gone. And instead of just going home and crying about it, I went on to Central Europe, which I had never been. And I went to Paris, then I went to Munich, then I went to Amsterdam. And there were times when, as can be, you feel collapsed. You don't feel supported from within because what you usually have for supporting you has just been withdrawn. But I had this little book with me. I cannot remember why I had it with me. And I started to read it. And I started reading it over and over again because it is about letting go, which at that time was not such a cliche as it is now, right? And the influence was, the book starts the way it ends. There's a Messiah in the Midwest he's a flyer. He does fly shows. That's what it is, a Messiah, right? And at the end, I don't remember how, but you read that and you can go right back and read it again. So I just read it over and over again. And there were periods during this dropout of whatever comforts your life seemed to be about, right? That moments of illumination. I've had that happen several times in my life. And if you go for that, then there are moments of illumination. And then there's moments of fear and moments of sadness. Illusion was sort of my metaphysical connection, ethereal connection to the possibility of emerging victorious from actually the loss of traditional securities. So that was the influence of it. It made me soar sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like at the time when you're traveling and you're like trying to grasp your own music career, right? Because you came from a band I guess from the story I read, you played your own bar mitzvah and got hired by the band.
That's exactly right. And then 13 on, I was playing bar mitzvahs, but now I was 30. So it wasn't like so cool anymore. Weddings and bar mitzvahs.
It's a particular type of gig where what you're doing isn't like the kind of focus. It's moving the room. It's the party, or you're really serving the people in a different way.
Yeah, and that was cool when I was 13. Probably even cool when I was 17. But at 30, I thought by then something else would be happening.
So I guess my next question with that is, like, at that point when you're influenced and starting to think in a different type of way. You at one point I've read something with Ron Carter as well.
Oh, well, do you want the connection? Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened was because I went on to Europe and because, like I said, there's a thing in Indian philosophy, Shakti, right? And if you believe that your life has a sort of destiny, predestiny, guided, any of the above, then one thing they would say is trust the Shakti, right? I didn't know anything about any of that at the time, but it took trust to go on to Europe. I didn't go there for a career thing. It was a woman thing, right? And that's a long story. I don't need to tell it, but I thought I was going to ask someone to marry me. And this person waited a long time. All right, so that's anyway. So the original purpose of going there to England, gone, I had two choices. I could go home and cry in my pillow, or I could trust something. The ticket back then, in those days, plane tickets were easily to just reassign. It's not like it is today. So somehow I changed it to be able to go to, I don't remember how I did any of that, but Paris first, then go to Munich. I don't know if I took a train or I took another plane. It's all a blur. And then Amsterdam before I went home. So that was the first time I was in Central Europe. Most jazz, even today, but more so there, was Central Europe. Germany, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, England. No, not England is not Central Europe. And there was the least amount of jazz in England, but I never went to England for the jazz. I went there because my girlfriend was English. So I'd visit her sometimes. I never went to where gigs were. So since my trip was unexpectedly cut short, because the purpose of it was already rejected, right? I had this time left on the ticket. I either go home and cry in my pillow, or it's nice you asked me this because nobody ever asks me this stuff. It's just different because I do a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah.
Not with other people. I teach a lot, and the lessons are always the same. So this is fun. So I decided to take a chance. You could just say it that way. Trust something. Don't go home. Go somewhere you've never been before. So I went to Paris. I only knew one person. She was just a friend of a friend. But the friend was good enough so that she moved in with her boyfriend, let me stay in her apartment. Here I'm a stranger in Paris, fighting sadness from a unrequited love, right?
Right.
Dug myself for doing it. I remember coming from the airport and seeing the Eiffel Tower, and that was one of those moments of illumination. Wow, dig me, man. I'm really trusting life.
Yeah.
I'm going on the life, letting it go, right? And while I was there, this is a great story, so I'll tell you the whole story. While I was there, she also had a friend at French radio, that's all state-run radio. I can't remember the name of that French radio, but a lot of jazz, actually, great thing about French radio at the time, they didn't have all these exact, it's either, this is a funk station, this is soul, this is underground, that's a jazz station. You could hear classical. They played anything in any kind of rotation. So that was interesting. But anyway, I went down there and they recorded me, in the studio, playing and singing, because I used to sing as well.
Yeah.
It was not my main thing, but I used to sing, right? So I'm there, and then they gave me a cassette tape of it. So then I went on to Munich. I mean, it was great to be in Paris. I was still lonely and scared, but it was great to be in Paris. So then I went to Munich. I had a friend there that I think he went to school with or whatever, and I could stay in his apartment, And so then one night I went to the main club called the Domizil in Munich, and I used to be pretty unaware of what's appropriate. For example, there was a great jazz band playing there, but on the break, I just went up and played solo piano.
Oh, man.
That's who I used to be. I did that at Vanguard once, and I think it was Herbie Hancock's group.
Yeah.
But I didn't know anything about Herbie Hancock. And then when I started to play, bass player and drummer came back and played with me.
Wow.
Anyway, this gig, I just played solo.
Yeah.
And the audience went nuts. So then I go to the bar, and I sit down and have a drink or whatever. And there's a German guy there who says, I could book you. And I said, really? He said, do you have any of your music that I can take? So I put it in my breast pocket.
Yeah.
It's a cassette I just made in Paris. I said, yeah, here's what I do. And I gave it to him. And my number, I guess, my home number. I didn't have a cell phone back then. I also went to Enja Records. I guess I must have intended to present something to them because I brought something else for them here. In the Lofts, I used to play some of those concerts, a solo piano concert. And they both laid down and they said, wow, that was my second record ever, first of my own music, right? So if I hadn't gone to Munich, I never would have met with Enja. I don't remember all the details, so I don't remember why I even had that music on me. But I gave this guy a cassette I just did in Paris, right? So now I got a record deal, at least to do a record. I wouldn't have had that if my girlfriend had accepted my marriage proposal. I never would have gone to Paris. And if I didn't go to Paris, I wouldn't have had a tape. I would never would have gone to Munich. I would have done the whole thing, right? So now I just go to my friend. I got another friend I went to school with. He's living in Amsterdam on a boat, So I hung with him on the boat a few days. I feel triumphant because I did triumph over this heartbreak. And I did trust this little book. I mean, I just kept reading it, and it would just sort of take me, what I understand now, and you can explain it a lot of different ways, and that's what my books are about. There's the conscious mind, and it's simply everything you're conscious of. There's a subconscious mind, and that's where a lot of stuff you do that you don't know why you do, or where the hurt is, where the woundedness is, in today's psychological terms, where the trauma is, right? And then it's the superconscious mind. That's been around in psychological research for a long time. Superconscious mind is that part you might call a universal mind. But that part that's connected to all things. The Buddhist thing, make me one with whatever. So, but that's actually a part of the mind. Whether God exists or not, it doesn't really have anything to do with being able to validate that. But one can feel like they are being visited by God if they're in their superconscious mind. It is definitely a little more metaphysical feeling than all the physical details of your life. So I finished that trip and I got home and I had a record date. I had this agent that said he could book me. I've never had a European tour together. Now this guy called me.
Yeah.
Said I booked you 3 weeks in Europe.
Oh, man.
This is from no weeks ever.
Yeah.
Now here's the funny part of it. When I recorded in Paris, I always would, back then, I would always sing some too. So on that recording, I sang. I did like one night a week at a coffee house in Boston when I was at Berkeley, like 10 years earlier, and occasionally would sing, basically just to freak everybody out. I never even did gigs of singing, but he heard the singing on the tape. And when I got there, I saw this huge poster, which I still had for many years. I got rid of it, but of me sitting there like this, and it says Ken Werner. It used to be Kenny, not Kenny. A singing piano player. That was the poster. So not only was I expected to go to do a tour, and they were like what they call ratskellas. They're like, basement bars.
Yeah.
And an upright piano there. I think they're almost all that. Maybe there's a couple of decent stages, but it was gig every night. And actually, comparatively to the money I would normally make, it was pretty good money every night. So the weekly thing was really good. But I had to sing. It was on the poster. And I've never sung I don't know how many gigs there was a week, 4 or 5, maybe 6.
Right.
That's what I want to say, but I don't remember. I never sang 4 or 5 or 6 nights a week. I was getting hoarse, but I'd always get it up somehow.
Yeah.
To do the gig. And I'd be singing away. I'd do Joe Cocker, Ray Charles. I had that kind of voice.
Yeah.
Some Beatles. And of course, then play some jazz. That's, So somehow I made it through 3 weeks. But when I got home from that trip that I trusted and I just used to book Illusions, I got a 3-week tour out of it. I got my first solo record that was of my music on a really good jazz label, Enja, which is pronounced Enya Records in Europe. And then I got a call from Ron Carter. Now, I never got a call from anybody to ever tour in Europe, let alone Ron Carter. His piano player was Chinese, a friend of mine, and he couldn't get his visa straight. So Ron had, I want to say 4 weeks, but maybe less, tour in Europe. Now you're talking about the big festivals because it's Ron Carter. And his piano player could not leave because of visa. He recommended me. And that's the connection between the book Illusions and Ron Carter. Between that trip, I actually believe that when I trusted and took a chance and went for what had no support, but the Shakti, which I call now, or inspiration or intuitive, whatever you want to call it, instead of going home and retreating, that I broke the ice vibrationally. And I considered the two things connected. Now, Ron Carter's claiming it's not really an accident. It's because I went forward after I got turned down to Europe, and my career actually started. I mean, this is amazing, Dave, because I went there because, I was doing some gigs in lofts and some jazz gigs, but still was supporting myself at weddings and bar mitzvahs. Actually, I stopped. My father said he saw I was in pain, and I'm very talented. Okay, whatever that sounds like. I should have been doing more than putting on a tuxedo and playing weddings and bar mitzvahs. A lot of it's my fault, the trouble I was getting into at that time. And a lot of it was just bad luck or karma or whatever you believe is why things happen. That's what it was. It was what it was. It is what it is, right? And he said, I want you to stop doing those wedding bar mitzvahs. They seem to be really hurting you. I'll give you $200 a week. Just work on your career or your art or your music. I really appreciate it. And that probably went on for 1 or 2 years. And still, I did the odd concert, whatever, but it still wasn't happening. I finally decided to give it up and go to this girl, this poor girl that's been waiting for me since the early 70s. And now we're talking about 1980. And say, okay, I can keep doing weddings and bar mitzvahs, and I can be the leader, and we can make really good money, and we'll get a nice house in Westchester. And I was envisioning this other life, giving up being an artist because it wasn't working out. And she never had the guts to tell me. She waited, but then she met a guy in her local town. She lived near Oxfordshire, and she could never tell me. We had conversations. I didn't find out till I got there. She was very shy and she just couldn't tell me. So now that I got there, that's how I found out we weren't going to get married. Now I went on to Europe, and when I came home, I had a career. I had a solo piano record. I had a 3-week tour in Europe, and then Ron Carter called me. I had I think a 4-week tour in Europe in the summer. I could say officially my career started when I actually went over there to officially give it up. It is a pretty incredible story, isn't it?
Yeah. It also makes me think of the story in Becoming the Instrument about instead of the oops, turning that to the ah.
Yeah.
I found that bit in it, because I stumbled across Effortless Mastery years ago. My book has the CD in the back, right? And it hit me at a really impactful time, which I'm sure this is a story. This is a story you're getting used to hearing, which
I hear it a lot, and I'm very grateful that I hear that a lot.
And but it hit me at a really impactful time when I was going through music school, studying jazz and music therapy, and starting teaching at the same time, and then doing the original groups and stuff all in so there was no time to really shed stuff. So the mini minutes that were there were had to be impactful in a way, but learning going through the first book and kind of learning these, it made me really accept mistakes in a different way. And your story is that in the career form, they go from that then hanging out with Ron Carter. What was that, to kind of dive more into it? How was that tour? What was going from these small
Ron
pubs?
Carter is a certain kind of personality himself. It's not just like going on tour with somebody.
Right.
It's not even like just going on tour with someone famous. You have to. I mean, I don't want to reveal much about Ron Carter, and I won't pretend I know him that well. But you definitely, part of the experience is Ron Carter being Ron Carter. A very proprietary guy in the sense that you could be incorrect around him. It was easy. He was relaxed, but it was a quiet kind of I don't want to say don't piss him off because that's really unfair, but you know what I mean? You felt you can just say, hey, Ron, made you look, or, your shoelace is untied.
Yeah.
That kind of guy. He has a lot of self-respect, which is great. It was a great lesson. And he at least demands, without saying anything, that you, in turn, respect him. Parameters of that respect are strong, There's no right or wrong. What the respect and space a person demands or gives themselves is the space that they'll have, or someone will violate that space. And if that person has good self-esteem, they'll let you know it, right? It was like that. You were a little timid around them. And, but here I was playing the big stages during this. The summers, and still is, I mean, a lot of damage has been done between the pandemic and just the fact that American commercialism slowly, sooner or later, erodes the artistic culture of other places. See, other places are anywhere from a couple of thousand years before America to thousands of years before America. America is invented at the same time as the Industrial Revolution. Therefore, America's culture is industry. America's culture is finance. The only reason America has culture, other than that, is because the derivative culture is Europe. And the fact that it's got such a rich culture is because of all the people that have come from so many places. And the most shameful reason is because of slavery. It has one of the richest music cultures in the world, but it wasn't really American. It was people that were brought here under incredible cruelty. And I don't know, I don't really know what justice is, to tell you the truth, because you would think, and it may still be coming, here's a country built on wiping out a culture, the Indians, and then a genocide and everything just as bad as Nazi Germany, if not worse. But except this lasts not the length of the Second World War, it lasts 400 years. I mean, if you want to argue that after the Civil War, it's a little, then you got Jim Crow, that goes to the 50s or 60s. Remember, it wasn't a voting rights thing, it's the 1960s. They were brought over in the 1600s. And yet, the music that resulted from that unspeakable horror is why America is one of the most envied countries in the world for music, theater, culture, sports. So I don't know. I don't get it. But that's the way it worked out. Justice, which we have a linear idea of justice. This is justice. This is unjust. Whatever it is beyond the physical, justice is, first of all, either to our eyes, which are earthly, there is no justice. I mean, it occasionally happens, but injustice or injustice could happen just as easily. It seems like just the luck of the draw or the unluck of the draw, right? But on another level, let's say the karmic level, I mean, I've read about it, the idea of reincarnation. That changes the whole equation of justice. A soul comes here and is so unfortunate or misfortunate, right? And how do you explain it? My father was an atheist, or so he said. And he used to say, if you give God the credit, you also have to give him the blame. And I grew up with a healthy mistrust of religion, because my father used to express it every weekend. And he had a great sense of humor. He said he was going to write a book. Thank God I'm an atheist. He had a fantastic humor, of which mostly I get from him. My mother had a great sense of humor too. But so, who are you giving glory to? There's some black people in a church in, North Carolina, South Carolina? They were there worshiping this God. And someone comes in and shoots everybody. Where's God? I mean, this is not an original complaint.
Yeah.
A lot of people, even holy people, grapple with, if God is so great, if God is so just, if God is love, how does he let these things happen? And I certainly don't have an answer. But the Indian, I don't know if Buddhism has reincarnation, but Hinduism definitely does. And even things that predate Hinduism, Jainism. I'm not sure, I'm not a historian. Sun god. I mean, there were gods before there was a god that people wrote about. The ancient religions, right? But anyway, let's just deal with, say, the Hindu culture. Reincarnation is as much a reality as, I don't know what, taking communion. It's not a theory. If you are a Hindu, it's a fact of life. You reincarnate. So if you buy that, then the rest of how that goes is the souls only come here to learn. And after they've done a life, they go back to wherever they go. The Akashic record or whatever. I hear a lot of stuff. I don't know how anybody knows. Back to the light? I don't know. And in that place, they choose their next lifetime to learn what they didn't learn that lifetime, or to even the karmic accounts. Any of that. I have no idea if that's true. I have no idea if Jesus is true. I have no idea if God exists. But if I was to take the different explanations offered, that one makes the most sense to me. It's very hard to accept that, say, someone born a quadriplegic, their soul chose this. Very, So I'm not telling you I'm all in, because I'm just another human here on Earth. And I keep working on myself to elevate my awareness, my vision, what I can see. I don't know if I'll ever see that, but I am evolving, and I do work on evolving. So, I'll take credit for doing it intentionally. I'm not just evolving because of pain. That's usually how people evolve. When do they get most virtuous? When they're under the most amount of stress, pressure, crisis, or persecution. At the same time of that horror, what pops out of the human psyche is greatness in some, So it seems that horror, pain, whatever version of that, the pressure of that forces some to achieve greatness. Would there be a Martin Luther King if there wasn't racism and slavery? What would he have to rise to? Why would he have had to rise? He might have just been another preacher. Would there have been a Gandhi if there was no British oppression for those centuries? Would there, you know what I mean? And so on.
Yeah.
So the human condition, on linear terms, doesn't seem very just to me. But reincarnation is very plausible to me. I can't say I know it. I'd have to achieve that mystical state of realization, God consciousness. I think I touched it occasionally. And the thing about music, which is why my book says, Becoming the Instrument, Lessons from and Self-Mastery from Music to Life. I cannot be a guru where, gurus, if you buy the premise, they see things on levels we can't see. They see the Shakti. They live in the Shakti. All pleasure and pain is the same. And every devotee is God. And they're God. A real guru, not only is a real guru God incarnate, just like Jesus, but their message is, so are you. I actually believe that was Jesus' message. But because of ego, spiritual perfection doesn't have much of a shelf life on Earth. It degenerates quite unintentionally into, look, let's say there's a Messiah. He's standing in the middle of a group. There's 12 guys around him. Messiah says some things very quietly, very humbly. And the only people that heard him was the 12 people around him, right? And here's how it begins. Someone in the concentric circles says, what did he say? And one of the 12 turned around and said, he said this, but it's like that game, Telephone.
Yeah.
You play around. Now, multiply that by centuries and then add ego. Ego is the urge to control others or control anything. And take a pure message and treat it with a little tincture of ego. A tincture of myrrh, like a what do you call it? Eyedropper. An eyedropper of ego, mix it in, and before you know it, you're telling other people how to live. And then mix another 50 years or a century or maybe 8 centuries, whatever. And then you've got power, money, land, And now this thing has become an excuse to land grab, to pilfer money, to kill people. The very person that preached this nonviolence is the person who's in name thousands, millions, how many wars? Before, and I am a historian in a way, I really am fascinated by history the older I get, but you could argue that the wars of the 20th century were not necessarily religious wars. But what about all the wars before that? And certainly, what about the Crusades? What about the Spanish Inquisition? What about the subjugation of the entire continent of South America? These were religious wars or religious persecution under the imperative or the premise of converting to a religion, right? Look at, I didn't remember this till I saw it in a documentary on Mark Twain. And he's talking about Huckleberry Finn. Isn't that the book, name of the book, Huckleberry Finn? And at the end, is it, or no, Tom Sawyer.
Tom Sawyer. I was thinking about that. I'm like, wait, which one?
Right. I'm not sure who's who, because I read the book in high school. I don't remember. But they point out this kid saves this slave, and they go away on a boat or something. And every religious authority said that slavery was God-given, God-ordained. God chose me to enslave these people. And in Sunday school, they might have talked about, if you see a slave escaping, God wants you to turn him in because he's supposed to be a slave and we are supposed to be his master. God said so. Of course, it wasn't God or Jesus. It was another version of ego, right? But at the end of Tom Sawyer, I didn't realize, I should just read it again. Time has been a factor with me. I should read it again. At the end, this kid has saved this guy, and he's thinking to himself, I guess I'm going to hell. Because Mark Twain, man. Mark Twain, man, I guess I'm going to hell. My preacher, my pastor, whatever, I'm badly paraphrasing. They told me I'm supposed to turn these guys, and I didn't. I guess I'm going. His preacher, whatever you call it, his church, he went against the church and helped this guy escape. Man, first of all, how hip is Mark Twain?
Right.
Unbelievably hip. But it just shows you that a message, and I heard this once, but I can't remember what it was. It starts as a truth, it blossoms into something, and decays into heresy. Oh, no, it starts as a truth, it blossoms into something, it then turns into heresy, and decays into superstition. That is the art.
Said. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget who said it, and I'm missing one of the words, but you can see that in a lot of institutionalized spiritual institutions, otherwise known as religions, actually. So I don't know how we got here, and I hope I don't get any weird visitations. There is a risk in this very country, in this very time. There is a risk of, I think, at every time. There's always been a risk to go against convention and simply tell the truth. If what I'm saying is the truth, it's the truth as I see it, and others are ready to disagree. But I'm in circles sometimes where we're sharing about what we think life is, and I've had people get aggressive to me because I didn't share that Judeo-Christian view, and some people it's more than not okay, Now there are others that wear it beautifully, like a loose garment. You want to hear a funny story? I mean, I know this is going wherever.
No, I'm digging where this is going.
You know who Bobby McFerrin is?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Bobby McFerrin, I did a record with him. I want you to send me this because this is not the usual interview I do. So I want to share it with some friends, Bobby McFerrin, before he was famous, I used to work with Chico Freeman, really great saxophone player, and his father, Freeman, I can't think of his first name, really great saxophone player, right? Chico and I played together quite a bit. We did some gigs, and he was doing some recording, and he did a record called Tangents for a big label with a good budget. We went to a studio in Long Island, and we spent 3-4 days there. If you're a jazz musician, the budget for a jazz record is 1 day in the studio, maybe 2. Actually, that's all in the past. There are no budgets for jazz records. You don't even get paid for a jazz record. You have to make it and give it to them. And you're lucky if they don't put in the contract that you have to buy 200 of them yourself. Now, that's not me. I'm old school, and I'm just famous enough that somebody will pay me to make a record. And if they don't, I'm not going there. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
But you know what? The young jazz musician fully expects to do so.
All right.
But that's not the subject. So we're in the studio. I don't remember how many days. It seemed maybe it was over the weekend, 3-4 days, and he had Bobby McFerrin on it. I'd never heard of him. Nobody had. And he played me a cassette tape. Bobby, I don't know if he ever released it. It was all the tracks was Bobby. You know, like Take
Yeah.
Six. It was all Bobby was the first to sing like that. You can hear Take Six and you realize they must have heard Bobby McFerrin, you know, just chronologically. Before Bobby McFerrin, I don't think that kind of gospel was around and jazz harmony was around. Well, yeah, I can't say that because the Hi-Lo's, a bunch of groups in the 40s and 50s, they were great, but Bobby gave it a different thing, and Take Six definitely took it in a new direction. But anyway, so he's playing this thing of this guy, Bobby McFerrin. I'm like, this is unbelievable. So he's got him on the record, right? So I wrote one tune on that record, maybe two, I don't remember, a tune called Computerized Indifference. And it was like sort of a 7.5 bar beat thing, 7.5 bars.
Yeah.
And techno, very 80s. Bop, bodo, bo da, bo tip, bop, bodo, bado do dee da, bop, bodo. I think that was the line. And then I wrote all this hip shit on top of it. And Bobby sang on it. There were certain melodies that would double my voice. And there was a bridge where I wrote harmony like this. Make sure original music is on. Yeah. Like this. Whatever. And I was like this. Whatever it was.
Yeah.
It was Bobby spent all night laying those parts in. It took all night. Now, Chico and I were keeping ourselves up, shall I say, artificially. And Bobby's in the studio, you know, with except tea, he had tea and water or whatever. And he's looking at a music stand. And I'm assuming he's looking at the part, right? He quietly and under control, patiently, got all those parts done. You can find the record, Tangents, and then listen to Computerized Indifference. And if you want to blend it with this podcast, you could do it, right? It is available. Now, at the end of the night, Chico and I are fried. Really fried,
Yeah,
you know? And I go into they had a lounge in this studio, and it was a pool table. And Bobby's in there now. He's just been up all night playing these parts. He's shooting pool. And he looks as fresh as a daisy. So I go into the studio. Well, let me do this in right order. He left the room. I go in there to see what's on the music stand. That's a Bible. Remember what we were talking about. I'm saying the very same thing could be unbelievably inspired on how you use a Bible, how you are become a Christian, right? Okay, I don't want to go too far there. See, a Bible. Now, I was the kind of cynical guy that if there was, back in the day, my father used to call those people, Jews and Christians, holy rollers. On Saturday, he would look out the bay window and watch them go in the temple and go, those hypocrites, those are lawyers, and they lie all week. Then he would turn on a TV evangelist and spit at the TV. These hypocrites, these thieves. And there's a number in the bottom you're supposed to send them money, you know. Now, I always laughed at him, but don't think it wasn't somewhat character forming.
Right,
This is what you're
right.
Even without buying what my father was saying, I was probably subliminally embracing it, right? So I see this, and my urge, when I see what I would call a Bible thumper, he wasn't thumping, Bobby didn't say anything to us. When we went out there, his Bible was sitting there. So I go out there, he's just shooting pool, and I want to tweak him a little bit, right? So I say, hey man, I just noticed on the stand, you have a Bible. What's up with that, man? I'm hoping he'll start proselytizing. I'm hoping he'll start evangelizing, right? So that I can, you know, suddenly be completely unmoved. I said, what's up with the Bible, man? He's shooting. When I look up, he goes, well, I believe everybody needs a little help. And I went, whoa. It didn't work. I did not shake his faith, and he might have just started my faith. So I tell you this story to show that there really are no villains. There's only one villain, it's the ego. And it turns blessed souls into villains. Whether it's greed, power, enslavement, everything is done because the ego has, however this works, I don't know if it's the ego and the mind or the mind and the ego or the ego's in the mind, but whatever, the ego infects the mind. And I guess by association, the spirit, with fear. At the root of it all, it's fear. What people, no matter what they do, no matter how horrible it is, everybody, this is why I accept I've heard certain holy people in other traditions. All searches are the search for God. That's a hard pill to swallow. You telling me somebody killed somebody, but they were really searching for God. If you buy into the total, equanimity of it, yes. Every ego is searching for safety. If a person is beset by ego, they are either consciously or subconsciously looking for a way to feel safe. What do I need to do so I feel secure? I may need to dominate everyone around me. I may need to get money from other people. I may need to, I can't really see it myself, but I will buy the idea. I may need to enslave people in order to feel superior. Why do I need to feel superior? Because I'm very, very insecure. It's so interesting, right? Where it can go, So in that way, the ego infects the spirit or the ego. And then what I talk about in the book is the space. I took that word because more than anything, I don't know what's in that place, but I know there's a space that a lot of things aren't there. When you get into the space, you use your breath to get into the space. And once in the space, you notice more the absence of things than the addition of things. It's the absence of fear. It's the absence of insecurity. It's the absence of doubt. It is, and in that space, you might want to input a few things like unconditional self-support. That's unconditional love is the term, but it's a big ask. So if you can't actually love yourself, how about just supporting yourself, even if you're not sure why you should? That's how it's unconditional. It's not unconditional if you only support yourself if you did something that gives you a reason to. And this is why it has to do with music. If you need to play well to feel good about yourself, then you're putting that pressure on your playing. I need to play well. And that, ironically, will be the reason you don't play as well as you can. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. It is it's it's not a paradox, and it's not an oxymoron, but it certainly is ironic that the desire to play well, and this is why my book sold many copies, because we have this common fragility, the ego. We have this common character defect, the ego. We have this common, we unite in our woundedness in a way, more than anything else. Everybody, you could ask anybody, think about a time when you really need to show everybody how good you played. How'd you play? And exactly, that's the answer I got 99,999 times out of 100,000. There was one person, and there's probably a few more, but overwhelmingly, right? Now think about a time you didn't care how you played. Everybody says better. That's the fundamental thing of Effortless Mastery, and it still powers the second book, Becoming the Instrument. Well, if that's the case, now that you know that trying wasn't making you play better, it was actually making you play worse, you're never going to try again, right? And you're laughing.
Yep.
And it does laugh because we all have this, we're very united in this, because even though you know that now, you're still going to try after about 5 bars. And because of neurological pathways. Now, I'm going to just stop it right there, not the interview.
Yeah.
But that is how the entire courses I teach courses. I have the Effortless Mastery Institute at Berklee College of Music. I teach them online. And from where we just were, everything unfolds from there. Why? When I know not trying makes me play better, would I still try? And now it comes down to reprogramming the mind, reconditioning yourself, changing the polarity, changing the apps, or I like to say changing the operating system. Because if you change the operating system, a set of previous apps don't run on that system. The self-doubt app does not run on an operating system that fosters self-love or self-acceptance, self-esteem. If the operating system has a fundamental thing in it, that's self-esteem, it won't run self-doubt apps. And there's other apps that will really flourish on it, like self-love. Maybe you have to build up to that. But what about self-acceptance? What about, this is not a term, self-embracement, but if you're going to choose the very difficult and dangerous path of being a musician, how about embracing yourself and making that decision? Yeah. So of course we believe that that's the right way, but isn't it practical? Do you play better or worse when you embrace yourself? How do you play when you don't embrace yourself? Worse. So the brilliance of Effortless Mastery is that I was born out of trying to help musicians get out of their own way. I didn't intend to do it. As you saw in the book, there's a few teachers I had that took me on that path, but I was obviously meant for that path because it then congealed into a whole third rail, so to speak. That's a mix of a lot of things, but it's not because of erudition. It was meant to come through me. I hate to sound like kind of biblical there, but what I've taught was meant to happen to me, and then it was meant to come through me because it did so effortlessly, to use a word. I'm just talking right now, I'm not even thinking. And since then, the things that have happened, including the karmic journey of the book, has been incredible. What I have to do is not get caught up in the mysticism of what has happened to me or the book. And what can be much more grounding is to try to stay with the gratitude that whatever has happened has really been a benefit to me, my family. Gratitude is a great grounding. And I'm very late to the game of gratitude. I had a teacher that I would just talk to on the phone. It wasn't really officially a teacher. And we didn't have one conversation for years without him mentioning that he was grateful. And I said, "Oh yeah, thanks for saying that again." I keep forgetting. I keep forgetting to be grateful, And only a few years ago, I started feeling grateful for everything. Everything. If I'm outside, it's really cold. I mean, really cold, and my hands are freezing. I don't have gloves on. There's a restaurant. I duck into the restaurant. I'm grateful there was a restaurant there to warm myself. But you can't stay in the restaurant if you don't order something. I'm grateful I had the money to order something so I could stay in it. You know what I'm saying? I went not realizing much of what I had to be grateful for. I'm talking about most of my life, okay, Dave? I'm not talking about when I was a boy. Most of my life, it's not that I was chronically ungrateful. I just never thought of being grateful. And whenever I talk to this guy, he would remind me of gratitude. Oh, yeah, thanks, man. Gratitude feels better than ungratitude. That's why I would embrace it. Feels good, Then something flipped, some switch. I had a lot to do with the pandemic because during the pandemic, all I did was teach. Obviously, none of us musicians went out and played. I kind of taught wall to wall this stuff that I know. And I didn't realize the benefit it would be to me, how high I would get helping people that much. Teaching was always in the mix with performing. Any musician would rather, and nobody ever said, "Oh, someone wants me to play at Carnegie Hall." No, I've got to teach an ear training class, man. That's my shit. Nobody teaches instead of what their heart's desire was for playing. Many people are very dedicated to teaching. And I mean, there are people that already have been successful and they choose to teach. But a very common model is teaching became another way to make a living if you didn't get to play enough. And most musicians don't get to play enough. So it's very common. We can at least say that, right? But I mean, I got to play enough, but I also had this great honor Berkeley gave me. They didn't just want me to teach, like in the piano department or something. They wanted me to do a whole thing based on my book. That's really an honor, you know? And it's really the best way I can help anybody is by teaching what I know. Don't hand me a syllabus. Anybody can do that. I'm not going to do that, you know? But during the pandemic, I did little else. And sometimes I felt like I was walking on air. And when I came out of that pandemic, I would say that the intoxication of teaching might have replaced the intoxication of playing. And when I play, I'm even more intoxicated now. But I don't do it that much, and I'm not concerned because teaching has provided my living. So I only want to perform. I don't not want to perform, but I have a manager since the late 90s. I told him, don't look for anything. If something comes in, we'll evaluate it. But I'm making enough money teaching, and I can't say I'm missing playing because teaching has become as much of a joy as playing ever was, sometimes even more. I think that's the end of that whole sequence. So if you have another question,
Oh
that was
yeah.
only like 10 minutes, right? Yeah.
But it's beautiful, and in a way, it's really interesting. Like, so also being someone who teaches and kind of getting it's when you get that breakthrough of seeing someone get a thing or seeing someone grasp a little bit more of themselves. I think you say it as in their success is your success in some
I never said that. That absolutely is what I meant with whatever I did say. Maybe I did say it. I said a lot of things, but that's not the truth. You said it. I heard it. That's the truth.
and
Let's
like
put it this way. You are much It's not even are you a better teacher.
yeah.
I've really boiled it down to this. What makes me happy and what makes me fearful? Or what makes me happy? What makes me sad? What makes me content and what makes me unsatisfied? What makes me self-affirming and what makes me scared, you know? And on the ledger of what makes me happy, self, whatever, is their success becomes my success. When that actually becomes true, you're skating on an airstream, you know, bumping along, trying to sound like you give a shit. You actually give a shit. That's much easier than looking like you give a shit. That's exhausting. I did that. You
Yeah.
don't want to look like you don't give a shit. You want to look like, oh yeah, I'm very into your success, but you really don't. So the energy to look like you do is much more than actually. And I don't know why it happened. I have to say, it was this wall-to-wall teaching during the pandemic. I went into a service mode. The mind is a programmable thing, and I must have moved into another subtle area of my brain that actually thrives on service. I've heard about people like that, and I've admired people like that, but I never really felt. And I had the gift of serving. I do have a gift of giving people the truth that will help them play better. That's where it all started, right? But I didn't really care about them. I hoped that it would create greater money, or, you know, like if I went to several schools, the value is that I could take my trio and we could do a tour, and the tour would be financed by those schools I visited.
Right.
So it's very exactly what I'm saying, right? Now I might still do that, but the teaching feels as much or more of the intoxicating joy as the gig. The gig is just another way of saying the same thing. Hey, check this out, guys. Anybody could do this. You may not do it on this level, but don't deny yourself the permission to absolutely intoxicate yourself with sound. If I can do it with this, you know, and how much do you have to be able to play if you have the right understanding? And how good you really have to play in order to get the secret treasure of music, which is self-intoxication, which is very well written about in the Hindu scriptures, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas. You know, intoxication is a word, I don't know the Bible, so it might be there somewhere, but you don't hear intoxication tossed around much among Judeo-Christians. But it's quite a prevalent word in the spiritual literature of Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism. I'm not an advocate for the East. It just happens that we keep coming back to a point of truth, I believe. For me, it's a truth that is better represented in Eastern scriptural philosophy than I am aware of. So I'm also allowing for the fact of simple ignorance of mine that I've heard about in Western scriptural, well, it's scripture. I've heard it a bit in Western philosophy, but it's usually a philosopher who's been influenced by the East. So it might be a Westerner, but he said, there's some pop cultural belief that Jesus didn't die, that he went to India. You ever hear this pop
No.
stuff? Yeah, I have no idea if it's true. And that much of what he learned was from, it doesn't have to be true, but you can see the logic behind it. If you look at Jesus' statements, if they are his statements, that's why I can't be too definitive, because, if you tell me this is what Jesus said, okay, now I've been interviewed many times, and typically, I'll ask somebody who's been interviewed. Have you ever been interviewed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it uncommon to be misquoted? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to even assume that Jesus wasn't misquoted, let alone assume that he even said that stuff. But if we make those assumptions and we just take the statements at face value and not contextually in the context of, say, Christianity, which is a religion or several versions, right? If we just take those statements, don't they agree perfectly with statements made by Buddhist monks, statements made by Indian gurus,
I got this book. I got it right here. I want to find the title for you.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go in a minute because I've been on all day and this was an hour, and my poor wife is going to make dinner that's going to be ready somewhere around the 7:00. And she's from Cleveland, Ohio, by the way.
Oh, really? No way.
Yeah.
That's
Hey,
awesome.
you know Jamie Haddad?
Jamie Haddad. That sounds really familiar. Oh,
Yeah, he's like a luminary from Cleveland, Ohio. A great drummer. He played with Paul Simon, probably 20 years. He played with everybody. He's a pioneer. Bill Durango was a pioneer jazz musician, played with Charlie Parker. He had a music store in Cleveland way back, and the guys my age used to be kids that sat at his feet. Skip Haddon, the drummer. Ernie Krivda.
Yeah.
Ernie,
I know, yeah.
Ernie is popular to this day in the Cleveland scene. Well, anyway, I know where you're from. So what were you going to say? What were you going to say?
Oh, the book, a long time ago, it's called Parallel Sayings, and it's a whole book kind of on what we're talking about this moment. It just takes sayings from every kind of Eastern,
Right.
in like, this is what they're saying, but it's pretty much the same thing here. And like, it's I always found like this need for balance, right? Like balance really struck me. So like, kind of this whole conversation of this ego kind of getting out of the way, throwing it kind of out of balance in a way, makes those points of how like, how you said it was very well said, how it kind of poisons everything and dilutes it and draws it towards something else.
Ego.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word. One word, I say ego, and you know all the ramifications of ego. So when you say ego pollutes the truth, we can understand it quickly. It's just the least amount of words. But I'm sure that book is inescapable to see that if you take the actual quotations of actual great beings, a great being is someone that realizes they're great while they're still in a body. They weren't divine once they died. Of course, we all are. But in the Indian culture, again, a guru is someone that realizes their divinity while they're still in a body. Now, that book, I'm assuming, is sayings from different divine beings that were human. You would tell me the concept, if not the words, are almost identical.
It's all the same notes.
I have to go to the religion and the dogma to impose all those differences. And on that note, my good friend Dave, I shall go and honor my wife's dinner by eating it.
Well,
This is a lot of fun, man. Thank you. I was expecting to have about Effortless Mastery, but you took a different track right away by asking me about the book Illusions. So I appreciate it.
well, I appreciate your time and I appreciate your music and your books. Like they've done a lot for me, and this has been awesome.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.